Why is he reducing the pace of quantitative tightening? Did he cut rates in September and December? He didn't need to. The U.S. economy is perfectly fine. Real GDP growth is growing above trend. But he did it because there's a $36 trillion pile of debt that's growing exponentially. The interest cost on that debt is growing exponentially. And the main inelastic buyers, China, Japan, Germany, these exporters that Trump has basically said, take your things and go home or build your factory in America. Therefore, you don't earn any more dollars. Therefore, you can't buy any more treasuries. Then if they're not buying, then the Fed or the banks have to buy.
The money printer is back. And Arthur Hayes says that's exactly how this story was always going to end. In this episode, Hayes lays out why America's debt spiral, Trump's tariffs, and the Fed's next moves all point to the same thing: more inflation, more liquidity, and ultimately, a much higher Bitcoin price. He explains why the Federal Reserve isn't really independent, why Powell will be forced to print no matter what happens in the economy, and why Bitcoin is set to decouple from stocks as global money supply starts expanding again. Forget the noise. Forget the headlines. In Arthur's view, this is all just part of the endgame, the unwinding of a broken monetary system that can only survive with constant debasement. If you care about Bitcoin, macro, and what comes next, this is one you don't want to miss. Let's get into it. And if you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button.
I know that generally when it comes to crypto, the main thing that you look at is the money supply. And you said prior to Liberation Day that you didn't think that high tariffs would cause Federal Reserve Chair Jay Powell to pull back on quantitative easing.
Correct.
Generally Trump and Powell have had kind of a rocky relationship. So I wondered, what you thought now that it's happened, and then, what the knock-on effect would be for crypto.
So in a recent essay that I published called the BBC, I essentially talked a lot about fiscal dominance, and I gave a funny little satirical interplay between Besant and Powell. But essentially, the point was...
And the graphic was hilarious, too.
The point is, as the Federal Reserve Chairman, yes, supposedly you're this, steward of the American dollar, keep inflation low, unemployment low, those sorts of things. But in reality, you're another arm of the government. And the government needs to get funded at an affordable price. And therefore, you will do what is needed as the Federal Reserve Chairman to make sure that happens. And I pointed out a very seminal speech by former Fed chairperson Arthur Burns from 1979 that he gave in Yugoslavia called The Anguish of Central Banking. And if you read that speech and you think about the issues that people are concerned about today within America and the world economy, you'd say, wow, it looks kind of like the same thing. And his point essentially was that the politicians and the government and the populace have adopted this stance that the government can solve all your problems. The only way government solves problems is spending money. And therefore, you embed an inflationary impulse into the bedrock of the democratic society like America. And therefore, as a Federal Reserve Chairman, while you might believe that you should be squelching inflation or tightening the monetary conditions sufficiently to eradicate inflation, what you really need to do is make sure that the people get the policies that they voted for, which is inflation, essentially, if you want the government to have all these sorts of programs. And back in the 70s, it was New Deal era, grand society type things. Today, it's woke, inclusion, DEI, all those sorts of stuff, right? Same thing, different nomenclature. And so Arthur Burns is saying, yes, I was a Fed chairperson. At any point, I could have stopped inflation, but I couldn't because my job really was to make sure that the government was funded. Now, Powell is in the same sort of situation here, right? What he should be doing is tightening monetary supply. The U.S. economy is growing very well. Stocks are down 10%, 15%, whatever, but they're at all-time highs. Record wealth for those who own financial assets. Unemployment's at 4% record all-time lows. Why is he reducing the pace of quantitative tightening? Did he cut rates in September and December of last year? He didn't need to. The U.S. economy is perfectly fine. Real GDP growth is growing above trend. But he did it because there's a $36 trillion pile of debt that's growing exponentially. The interest cost on that debt is growing exponentially. And the main inelastic buyers, China, Japan, Germany, these exporters that Trump has basically said, take your things and go home or build your factory in America. Therefore, you don't earn any more dollars. Therefore, you can't buy any more treasuries. Then if they're not buying, then the Fed or the banks have to buy. And so Powell, he said his piece. He tried to be Paul Volcker or, the modern day equivalent. But in reality, he's just another government hack and he needs to print the money. And he basically said that at his last press conference, I'm reducing QT. Why reducing QT? Economy is fine. I might do QE for treasuries, let the mortgage-backed securities run off, take the proceeds, buy treasuries. And then he stated that when asked, my base case is tariffs, inflationary impact is transitory. The fact that he even used that word is hilarious. He got so torched the last time he used that in 2022 when inflation spiked in a transitory manner to 40-year highs. However, that just tells you that his bias is easing. His bias is let's provide money to the treasury market so that Bessent and Trump, or whoever is in charge, can do the policy that they want to do. And I know people think that Trump is trying to sort of, do austerity, but his plan is from a 7% deficit to a 3% deficit. His plan is not to go to a surplus. His plan is not to, on a net basis, retire treasury debt. He's going to inflate it away by growing nominal GDP growth faster than the rate at the deficit. Yes. However, this is not a Argentinian style Javier Milei. I'm going to have GDP crash by 4 or 5% because I'm removing this credit from the system. So I think, again, money is being printed. It will be printed. Powell told you it's going to be printed at the last press conference. He says tariffs are transitory. I know Bitcoin has done pretty poorly alongside the NASDAQ and the S&P and a lot of other global stock indices. But I think that's just, investors not really appreciating that this is a fiat liquidity bonanza that's about to happen. I think Bitcoin will decouple from these and stock indices and trade alongside gold and really reflate higher as the money supply globally goes higher.
Yeah, so I did also see in that same newsletter, you said if I had to place a bet on whether I thought Bitcoin would hit 76,500 or 110,000 first, I would bet on the latter. So how are you coming up with these numbers? And I know you wrote that before Liberation Day. So do you still hold that opinion?
Yes, I still hold that opinion. So 76,500, that's the low that we reached in March. The local low after we broke through 70,000 in November of last year. 110,000, that's the new all-time high that we reached on January 20th, right as Trump was being inaugurated. And so I think that we take out that next all-time high and Bitcoin continues to do very, very well. The stock market, who knows, right? I don't really do stocks. It's hard. Company earnings, evaluations, and all that kind of shit, right? All I focus on is global liquidity. I know that Bitcoin performs very, very well in a deflationary bust, which is what could happen in this situation, and that the monetary authorities in the United States and the rest of the world will provide financial accommodation to make sure the governments get funded.
So I saw that on Polymarket. Well, actually, this was yesterday when I wrote this question, but at that time, Polymarket traders were saying that they saw a 49% chance of a recession in the US in 2025. And I wondered what you thought of that. And if we do end up in a recession, what do you think would be like the likely cause or causes?
I mean, it could be a bunch of government workers are fired. There's a knock-on effect of spending. Maybe Elon's Doge catch a bunch of waste or fraud or government programs. Maybe this tariff thing causes a lot of companies to retrench. I don't know. I don't really think, because all I care about is global liquidity, a recession in my mind is just another way for Powell and his cohorts, people at other central banks, to basically stand up on the podium and say, oh, recession, therefore I must print money. So great. If everyone thinks there's going to be a recession, regardless of whether that happens or not, it's just another excuse for a central banker to get up on the podium and say, oh, the economy is weak, therefore I must print money, because that is the Keynesian economic theory that I subscribe to.
But do you think it is likely, or what odds would you give it?
I don't know. I have no fucking idea. It doesn't matter.
Okay. Well, actually, so circling back to the reason that Trump wants to do the tariff, or is doing the tariffs, do you think he actually can bring manufacturing back to the U.S.?
Possibly. I don't think it's going to happen on a timeline that's electorally feasible, which is why I believe that he has to go hard and fast, basically by now, and things have to look better going into the end of the year, because obviously he doesn't have to get reelected. But those who support him all have political careers that they want to continue after 2028 or 2026. And therefore, the Republicans need to see some green shoots. I said it was going to get China to build manufacturing. We punished China. And guess what? Alibaba is building a big fucking factory in Ohio, right? And he's going to point here and there. And yes, I'm sure in aggregate, maybe they'll tick up as just a little dot on the chart. But in the media, he's going to play it up, and he's going to point to all these different companies who've contractedly or basically said they're going to build something. It won't be built in the next 12 months, or probably not in the next 24, 48 months. But he just is going to point to, yes, I had a press conference with so-and-so major global CEO, and they said they're building a factory here. And she said she's building a factory there, right? And that's what he's going to want to show the American public as to, this is why there is this pain in the stock market in the first half of the year. This is why it's going to get better going forward. And this is why you should vote for XYZ person in this congressional or senatorial district.
Yeah, I mean, for sure, the timeline thing is a big question, but I'm sure you saw he has been floating the notion that he might try to go for a third term. So
I don't believe that.
Yeah, I would like to not believe that. So hopefully that won't happen. Let's actually switch back to Bitcoin. I know you're not a fan of the strategic Bitcoin reserve. Why not?
So I think anytime a government holds something, they can sell it. So everyone always freaks out about XYZ government holds so much Bitcoin. Are they going to sell it? They're not going to sell it. They're going to market order, dump it. Are they going to do, how are they going to do these things? So if people support governments globally amassing these stockpiles of Bitcoin, when the politics change, and the politics always change, can't really predict these things. Then from euphoria, we're going to switch to fear of what's going to happen. When are they going to dump these things? So why, if we know this is going to happen, why are we advocating for this policy? And then I think the second thing is not that I don't like it. It's more, I think people are unrealistic. What people think in their minds is, oh, the government's going to issue some bonds, print some money, and then they're going to go and they're going to buy crypto and put it on their balance sheet, because most of the major governments in the world are deficit countries, or the largest ones in the United States that people are always looking at. It's a deficit country. They have to print something to buy Bitcoin. It's not like they have a bunch of savings that they're going to buy Bitcoin. But even still, even if you have a bunch of savings, there's lots of people in your country that are probably poor, or there's some societal problems that you could be fixing. And what you're saying is, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to buy some Bitcoin and some crypto. Now, of course, I love Bitcoin, I love crypto, but I just don't see the political optics of that being very palatable to a lot of people. So, there's a bunch of crypto bros going to get rich because you bought their bags, and you've got, the poor person over here suffering, and that money could have gone to some sort of enhanced government program. I just don't think that's very smart politics. And at the end of the day, I think people are being a bit delusional as to what's going to happen. Yes, maybe if a government had already seized Bitcoin, like the United States has 200,000 Bitcoin that they seized from other people, and they say they're not going to sell it while Trump was in office, or the Republicans, or whatever, fine, I get that. But notice what Trump said, in a budget neutral fashion. So he isn't even going to print money and basically buy Bitcoin. So I'm not sure what people are really getting all excited about. I think people need to think a little bit more about, if you're a politician, was this what you really would do if you had the money printer, or if you had a pile of savings to do something with?